Urban One Incorporated, Radio One, or any of its subsidiary companies. Attorney Nathaniel Lee, a lawyer with credibility, success, and experience. Representing people in hundreds of jury trials, Nathaniel Lee is who you want by your side in the courtroom. You've seen the rest, now hire the best. Contact Lee, Cosell, and Feigley today. And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're getting closer to that holiday that, Easter is coming up soon. And we won't be on the air usually for the Easter weekend. But we have our superstar panel with us again, Attorney Benita Banks, Masters in Tax, also a cybersecurity expert, and Marlon Primes. He was with the Department of Justice for most of his professional career, working on behalf of the United States of America. But we start off today with evidence of how the current administration feel about Blacks in our country. In March of 2026, the UN General Assembly just recently adopted a resolution led by Ghana declaring the transatlantic slave trade the greatest crime against humanity and calling for reparation for its enduring injustices. The resolution passed, of course, with 123 votes. It urged apologies, restitution of cultural items, and remedial action. And who opposed the resolution? The United States, Israel, and Argentina. Counsel, what's going on?
Well, good morning, everyone. Nathaniel and Benita, certainly good to be here. Yeah, this is really troubling news that the United States, of all people, would veto such a resolution. And I think if you look at it from a historical perspective, the United States was instrumental in establishing the United Nations following World War II to have an organized system of justice, around the world. And given the United States' role in the transatlantic slave trade, it doesn't show leadership by opposing this important resolution. And instead, what we've seen from this administration is we've seen, massive efforts to make people forget what really happened and how horrible it is. As many of your listeners, Nathaniel, may recall, there were books being published talking about slaves and enslaved people were workers. And there was this whole mythology that happened after the Civil War and the Daughters of the Confederate Revolution. They really tried to sanitize slavery and make it seem as though, hey, this was for our benefit. And we're seeing kind of a resurrection of that with this anti-DEI movement and talks about sanitizing the great works of the African American Museum. And in fact, before this resolution was vetoed or voted that the United States voted no, we had the President of the United States saying that there was too much emphasis in the African American Museum on slavery. Which is just astounding because, as many of your listeners know, it was African American slaves that helped build this country. In fact, before the Civil War, American slave was the most valuable, commodity, so to speak, as relates to a young nation. So without the slaves, we wouldn't have had the Industrial Revolution. We wouldn't have had the wealth that was built up. So it's just really sad that there's not an acknowledgement of it, of the problems as it relates to the transatlantic slave trade. And finally, I'll just add that, there's a couple of things that I think your listeners should take advantage of. Following the Great Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt commissioned what's known as the Slave Chronicles. It was the last group of individuals that were enslaved. And he's hired a bunch of writers to really chronicle how bad slavery was in the United States. And it's something that we should never forget. In terms of not only what happened to us on the transatlantic passage, the Middle Passage, where millions of African Americans died, but what happened to Americans in this country. And then following that, you had 100 years of apartheid and Jim Crow. So if any country should come forward and say, hey, it was wrong, it should be the United States. So it's very deeply disconcerting that this events happened, but I'm happy that Ghana and other countries, 123 nations, basically voted yes.
Yes, this resolution was presented on last Wednesday and led by Ghana President John Magana on the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. This is a annual commemoration, and this resolution was um, approved by the 123 countries that were present, including China, Russia, India, Brazil. 52 countries abstained, non surprisingly, including former colonial powers, France, the UK, and almost every European nation. The resolution is intended to raise awareness regarding the dangers of modern racism, prejudice, and the legacy of slavery. And unfortunately, but predictably, the United States dismissed the resolution as a costly distraction, asserting that slavery was not illegal during the time that it commenced and was perpetuated. The UN now, part of the resolution also included moving forward and importantly with a framework for reparations. And as you know, in this country, efforts toward reparations have been virtually thwarted. Um, However, we've seen, for example, the former great Michigan Representative John Conyers introduce a legislation, reparations legislation, in virtually uh, every year during his tenure in Congress. We've also seen Sheila Jackson Lee introduce legislation that would establish a commission to study reparations. And unfortunately, we could have not been able to get off the ground even a commission to establish a study on reparations. I will say that in the city of Evanston did pass a resolution, or they passed legislation. It's the first municipally funded reparations program in the United States. It's called the Restorative Housing Program, and Black residents will be eligible for $25,000 for home improvements, mortgage assistance, um, or down payments for homes. And the eligibility is based on either living in Evanston between 1999 and 1969, or being a direct descendant of someone who did. And individuals must be um, African American, 18 years of age or older. We know that um, the consequences of slavery, as Attorney Primes laid out, still exist today through and across history through redlining, disinvestment in our communities, and through lack of equal access to education, healthcare, housing, and social justice. The resolution as well addresses the attempts to erase African American history in the United States. And I think that this resolution is very powerful. And as we begin to build a framework for reparations, which again starts with one, truth, accountability. And once those two things have occurred, healing can begin.
And one of the things that's really important, to go along with that is that one of the wonderful things that South Africa did that we did not do in our country following the Civil War is that in South Africa, they said, hey, look, after the fall of apartheid, we're not going to prosecute, individuals for the crimes that they committed during apartheid. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a Truth and Reconciliation Commission so everyone documents exactly what they did. And we did the opposite in the United States following the Civil War. When southern states had seceded from the Union, they were trying to get back into the Union. There became this lost cause mythology that really romanticized the reason the Confederacy was fighting the Civil War. And so when we talk about the slave trade, we also have to talk about this mythology and how it was used to try to really sanitize what really happened. And we're having that today with that resurrection. So I really think it's important, Nathaniel, for all your listeners, our Black churches, our fraternities and sororities, we have to really be committed to making sure that people do not forget. And most importantly, our young people don't forget, the sacrifices that our ancestors made. Slavery in America was different from any slavery the world had ever known. There had never been a system where a foreign country, let's just think about that. It would be the equivalent of a foreign country coming to the United States, burning down all of Akron, Ohio, where I grew up, or Cleveland, Ohio, marching people several hundred miles to the coast, and then taking them to a foreign country to work the rest of their lives. They could be beaten, they could be murdered. We have to make sure that people really understand that story. And the Middle Passage journey was several months in a cramped ship. A lot of people, when they got sick, they were just thrown overboard. So a lot of the people that suffered, are at the bottom of the Atlantic. And so I just really think that, on this day of remembrance, African Americans, our African brothers around the world and other countries, the Caribbean, we have to say loudly that we will never forget what happened. And we're not going to let the world forget what happened. And I think that's the important thing about this process. The other thing I think is really important as well that I really liked is that I almost kind of get sick to my stomach when I travel to Europe because there's so many African artifacts and gold when you visit, a lot of these European countries. And I think the Ghanaian president was right. He says, hey, give us our stuff back. Give us our artifacts back, give us our culture back, our history, our monuments, our statues. That's important as well. So it's just really, really important that we never forget, that we don't let the majority culture forget what happened, because this was used to really show, to demonstrate, at least in the minds of, our white brothers and sisters, that they were superior. They tried to make it seem as though we had no history to justify the slave trade, and it continues on today. So it's really important in terms of what is done and the lasting ramifications of what happened.
Well, here's my concern, counselors, is that I think most people are not aware of the severity of the attacks on African Americans in this country. What was the justification of the Trump administration to not support this important legislation? I've heard that they're doing things with the African American Museum, but this is a good illustration of this administration's opportunity to correct in part some clear injustice, and they're taking cover in making these excuses. And I don't understand these excuses that they're making at all as to why they wouldn't support this important legislation. Didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, the reasons don't make any sense. I mean, you hear the kind of same old talking points. Well, hey, we can't judge people at that time based on our standards now. And that's really a false argument. Murder, rape, kidnapping were crimes in the 14th century. It's always been a crime. So to hide our head and say, hey, we're misjudging people. That to me, really misses the point. And the other thing too that really concerns me is that there's so much misinformation about the slave trade. One of the things that the Ghana president said it's not only talked about our textbook that talk about slaves or slave people as happy workers. He talked about Prayer University, which I mentioned on prior shows. This is a online publication, online website that really is just is used by they said 1,000 school districts around the country, and these folks had the nerve to have these alleged time travelers that go back and talk to allegedly Christopher Columbus, and he justifies slavery. And there's similar videos that are like in a cartoon format, and our children around the country are getting this misinformation. So, I think we just our country has its head in the sand. They refuse to see because it's hard. It's hard to look at the brutality, the inhumanity. And as Ketanji Brown Jackson, I think she eloquently, indicated in her dissent in the affirmative action case, you don't get beyond race by just ignoring it. You get beyond it by staying focused and finding out what you did, why you did it, and try to make it better. And I think, the explanation is, hey, I'm going to put my head in the sand, make it seem as though this is part of, what's happened previously in history and try to wipe our hands of it. But that's why it's so important for us and our listeners to just, our fraternities and sororities, to really be education centers of our people and never let individuals forget. We should be having Black history, slave history at our churches and our fraternities, in our professional organizations to really let people know what really happened during that time period. And I think we really the Washington Post really talked about a great organization that's going to the museums, like the National African American Museum, and they're taking videos and they're comparing to see, what type of sanitizing efforts the administration is taking. Those are things that we have to do. But I think in answer to your question, it's ahistorical. They have their head in the stand, and there's really no explanation.
Hey, Attorney Banks, this is what really galled me. Our ambassador wrote this lengthy response as to justify this. Here's what he said in his written document. Also, there are some fake news articles suggesting that the sponsors of this resolution call into question President Trump's support of the Black community. We reject any such suggestion. Indeed, President Trump has done more for Black Americans than any other president and enjoyed historic support from the Black community in the 2024 election. He is working around the clock to deliver for them and make our country greater than ever. It was such.
I saw that as well, and it's sickening partisan rhetoric and particularly offensive.
What about the 350,000 African American women that lost their job because of his conduct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the outright attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which again are initiatives designed to ensure equal access to opportunity, which for so long had been denied to qualified African Americans, both with respect to corporate positions and federal government contracts.
It's so insulting. So we'll go to caller. Okay, Imhotep, you got a question coming for today, sir.
Good morning, my great legal scholars and minds. We really appreciate you all. I thought that the UN resolution was a monumental step. And we must remember, I just did Imhotep Sankofa on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. I just did a six-part piece on the trans-Sahara slave trade. Can't forget about that one too. That one is still going on to this day. Libya, African people are being made and put into servitude, other places. So I know my Muslim and Islamic brothers don't ever like to talk about it. I know Minister Nuri Muhammad here locally personally. I used to attend the temple on Stony Island Avenue in Chicago. So, but they never like to talk about the trans-Sahara slave trade, but that was a big part of it too. And we need the Arabic countries to own up to that one. Donald Trump, military, Nate, me, you were veterans. Pete Hegseth just withdrew the promotions of 4 black women in the military. Generally, they were going to 1 star, and generally that's once you've got your recommendations, you've done what you're supposed to do. You definitely know they qualify. Okay, already you know they qualify. But Pete Hegseth withdraws their promotions, women. Then we hear this report that Trump claimed that he didn't want to stand at the military funeral ceremonies next to a black woman. This is preposterous behavior. General Mark Kelly said that you have every right, we know the UCMJ, to disobey an unlawful order. Somebody has to stand up and disobey these unlawful actions. There is no way in the world these qualified women should have been taken off the list for promotions that generally no problem with at all because they've done everything required. We have a government that's off the rails. We have an administration that is completely racist. And I would just want to throw this out there, and I know it's not, well, it is a legal issue because Drewski copyrighted the skit before he did it to make sure he couldn't be sued. But the Drewski, Erica Kirk, and I went back and looked at the video where he got that from when she talked about white men. We need to stand up and white men, this and the third. This is ridiculous. And so I'm communicating to all young brothers. I know brothers, because I'm about 60, you guys got to vote. You see the win down there in Florida this week, the state races down in Florida, in West Palm in Trump's backyard where the John guy lost, in Tampa where the other Navy veteran beat in the state Senate. We saw Boca Raton vote a Democratic mayor for the first time in 40 years. We already know Miami voted a Democratic mayor for the first time in 30 years. So it's happening locally, but we just got to make sure we can continue this pressure because they are completely racist. And I don't know if the judges on the federal level, maybe Attorney Prime, you can speak to it. They're not going to even get through all these cases probably by the time election comes around, even in November and probably even in the next 2 years, would they? And thank you for taking my call. Appreciate you all.
Wow, that was a lot, Attorney Prime's bank. I did pay attention to the Florida election, but the most illustrious aspect of that to me was the Miami's mayor's race, because if you've been down to Miami a lot, it's not just little Havana in Miami. I mean, it's everywhere. When you go to Miami's airport, the one thing that I noticed is that they give the instruction in Spanish, and it's almost like you're going to a foreign country a lot of times when you go down there. And the fact that they abandoned, but then now, this is off top a little bit, I saw the Trump administration now talk about taking over Cuba. And so, and I don't understand that process as to why this is suddenly an important issue to deal with in American politics at this date and time. But back to this process, though, is that I doubt if anywhere in America that I've seen news stories that follow this UN Resolution 52, I didn't see it on our local news. I'm not sure whether or not you saw it on your local news, but I think it's important news for our viewers to understand that the severity of the situation we're dealing with now in America.
Yeah, without question. One of the things that was indicated in the call is your listeners, Nathaniel, should really be up in arms about, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of what he now calls the Department of War. If you look at his qualifications and you compare that to C.Q. Brown, I mean, there's no comparison whatsoever. I mean, Pete Hegseth was a weekend anchor on Fox News. He was not a general. He had no, major responsibilities and became Secretary of the Department of Defense, which he now calls the Department of War. And so I think, he really kind of approaches this issue of diversity as if just opening up opportunities for African Americans somehow is discriminatory. When all is being said is that, hey, give everybody a fair chance. There's no white superiority. There's no one that has the birthright for these jobs. In order for the military to work, they need to represent, the public at large, and you need to cast a wide net. And so I think what they're doing is they're really trying to make it, seem as though the only qualified people are people that look like Pig Headset. And that's really dangerous. And that's something that we really need to push back on. And so these individuals, normally the secretary is not going to get involved in that process. So he really inserted himself and made sure that qualified individuals that already had been, designated through the administrative process did not get these important designations. So it's really, shameful. I hope, Congress has hearings, especially if the Democrats take over the House and the Senate. And I hope they really get to the bottom of it because, certainly this is a clear and present danger for our military and our country as a whole.
If these reports are true, and I've been hearing different stories, but if these reports are accurate and that this secretary has removed 4 decorated officers from a promotion list after having been selected for their merit and performance, this, counselors, is not only outrageous, it's downright illegal. And it goes against and is inconsistent with every principle of merit-based service in our military. And it's just outright unacceptable. And Secretary Hegseth has no authority to make this a determination. And to your point, Attorney Primes, it seems that this administration has elevated loyalty over merit, or as I would say, loyalty instead of merit. And so, again, if these stories are true, and there are many individuals that are close to the situation, but they don't want to be named. But if these stories are true, these actions are outright illegal, and we should be aggressively pushing back on these illegal actions.
The problem we're dealing with now is so severe. When Imhotep sent a text in our chat box that said that all of the heads of the Pentagon and military position now are white men. That's a radical departure than what we've seen traditionally in our military. Since 1955, I remember the story that the military was desegregated in 1955. So before we had desegregation in America, the military counter led the issue on this matter because of the great contribution of so many men and women who contributed to success of our military in wars and conflicts all around the globe. And everybody recognized the fact that, like it was not just the Tuskegee Airmen and people like that, but it was the Special Ops, the 82nd Airborne, which my brother was a member, and you have all these elite military groups. And we had a great deal of participation in our war activities, particularly with African American men, particularly when we got to Vietnam. While I was in law school, we had one of the generals gave a speech in one of my classes, and he said, I remember in the class, he looked at me, he said, did you know that half of the men who died in Vietnam were African American? Well, no, I didn't know that. And so we made significant sacrifices, and it is grossly unfair to see that we got a totally unqualified person who is running the Department of Defense, now Department of, as he called it, War, and somehow he's making these critical decisions that are adverse to our community interests. Now, the next issue, of course, on the war issue, we've been talking around that, and the biggest consequences that I've seen in my local community is gas prices. Now, I went by Kroger the other day, and premium gas was like $5.15, and regular was, I think, about $4.65 or something. It's getting outrageous. So the net effect of this unprovoked war is that we're seeing a sharp increase in prices. And I'm not sure that this very expensive war will result in further decline in the stock market either, because I noticed that the stock market is now collapsing, it appears. We're up to, 50,000 or 5,000 now, is down about 400 points. So how long will this war last? Where are we headed?
Well, according to the president, the war has been won, right? And that we're, quote, winding down. And we continue to send troops into the Middle East as late as this week. As we know and have discussed, and as you stated, Attorney Lee, we're seeing gas prices soar here in Chicago to almost $4 a gallon. This war continues into the fourth week. It is illegal and unconstitutional in accordance with Article 1, which states very clearly that only Congress has the authority to declare war. The American people no case was made to the American people for why there was an immediate threat. We're seeing, again, gas prices, airline fare prices, the price of fertilizer. Farmers were still suffering from the increase in tariffs. And now with this war, fertilizer, diesel prices are soaring at this time, critical time when farmers are, sowing their crops. There was a promise from the president, of course, that America would be put first, that there would be a focus on affordability and cost, and that there would be no foreign forever wars. But again, we're seeing U.S. troops, at least 13, have been killed and hundreds injured. There was just an attack, I understand, on a Saudi Arabia base, injuring numerous U.S. Troops. We know that President Obama had a deal in place which included monitoring of nuclear buildups in Iran, and the president tore up that deal. We also know that regime change has never worked. We've seen this in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam. We also know that there has been no plan, no objective articulated, or no end game. The Strait of Hormuz continues to be closed, and um, the president also claimed that 8 months ago that Iran's nuclear capability had been completely wiped out. So I don't know where this ends, and I'm interested in your perspective, Attorney Primes.
Yeah, I mean, this is just really disconcerting. Now there's talk about, troops, going to the region, and this is just going to be a calamity. Uh, and I think it kind of dovetails with our prior conversation about there not being diversity in the military. Not only do we see the fact that there's not diversity in terms of race, there's not diversity in terms of thought. The most extreme elements of the military are the people that are whispering in his ear. So, my suspicion, according to press reports, is that they're going to try to take what's known as Karg Island, where all the oil, virtually all the oil in Iran kind of passes through. And, one of the things I think we have to be concerned about is that, hey, if we're successful in that endeavor, how do we keep it? What about the casualties? The other thing that's really important is that, we're fighting two different wars. America and Israel, they're fighting a war, bombing, Iran. And Iran is saying, hey, I'm going to destroy the world economy. And close the Strait of Hormuz. I'm going to, and they've basically bombed the largest gas field. They have, bombed a lot of the other Gulf countries. So in the aftermath of that, we may see soaring prices that are going to hurt everyday, Americans. We already have a very feeble job market, and this is only going to make matters worse. The other thing I want to, just kind of piggyback on, what Attorney Banks had indicated, that I'm really haunted, and your listeners should be as well, Nathaniel, about a very important speech that President Barack Obama gave. And he really pointed us to this moment. Now, as you may recall, uh, President Barack Obama was very courageous. He had an international coalition. Juxtapose that to what President Trump is doing, going it alone, not even notifying our allies, not even, having a conversation with the American people. So what Barack Obama did, he went to the United Nations Security Council, got an approved resolution, unanimous, got a signed agreement that Iran was not going to develop nuclear weapons, and there would be a monitoring regime in place. Then what we had is, Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, took the unprecedented step of traveling to the United States and speaking before Congress, and really belittling a sitting president and the effort that he made to make peace through this agreement. And the point that I want to really focus your listeners on is what Barack Obama's response was. His response is, what is your plan? If you tear up this agreement, then what is the plan? Is it eternal war? If there is no monitoring in place, what is to prevent a war from happening in the Gulf? And that's exactly what happened. So I think a lot of your listeners, they should really focus in on that question that Barack Obama put to Prime Minister Netanyahu. What is the plan? It can't be that, you're going to go away from what's known as a two-state solution, which was Israel and Palestine live side by side, and there be peace talks with with Iran and the Arab neighbors. And what Barack Obama said is, hey, are you going to basically have a tale of two countries where you're going to have a large number of people in these occupied territories that have no right to vote, have no right to participate in society, and you're going to run an apartheid system? And he's right. That appears to be the plan. There's no plan in terms of peace. There's no plan in terms of the two-state solution, which has been U.S. policy for decades. And it's just a turn of war. So what I think, again, should be an important, calling card for, those that are running for office is that there should be hearings. Hey, what was the U.S. intelligence that prompted the war to take place? Was there an imminent threat? According to press reports, including Mr. Kent, who just resigned from the administration as a senior intelligence official, he basically said there was no intelligence, indicating that Iran was posing an imminent threat. And if that's the case, there should be consequences for that.
Well, you said something that was very, very important. Joe Kent was not the typical American politician. Joe Kent was the United States National Counterterrorism Center Director. He just resigned, and he was a MAGA Republican. He was a strong supporter of the President of the United States, and he claimed there was no credible evidence or intelligence that Iran was close to developing nuclear weapon or posed any imminent threat to the United States or Israel. He further alleged that the United States was pressured into war by Israel, directly challenging the Trump administration justification for the military strikes. So the top intelligence official in our country in terms of counterterrorism says that this is all wrong and that it's all make-believe justification to enter into an unprovoked war. A war that is costing us somewhere between $1 to $2 billion a day, not just human lives and all the people that have been injured, but this is one of the most expensive wars in American history already. We are spending, because our weaponry is so much more expensive now. And those bombs, I found out that they're saying are costing $5 million? And, I'm thinking, wow, we were struggling to find money for people health insurance or to treat disease process. But now we're spending money like crazy, destroying our country in an unprovoked war. Makes no sense to me. What is the end game here? What are they trying to accomplish by bombing this country? The most dramatic thing that I've seen is that you bomb the school with all those young kids. We just counter and say that's a casualty of war, that you start killing innocent civilians for no legitimate reason. We used to call that murder or mass murder. I just don't understand why most people don't understand how severe this process is. It's just terrible. But we have let me see, caller, you have a question or comment for us. Go ahead. Hello, you on the line?
Yes, this is the guy calling. Good morning, folks.
Good morning, guy.
Just wanted to mention, in case some of the listeners don't know, that in terms of this so-called war with Iran, the administration is being asked, the Congress is being asked for $200 billion to prosecute that war. And if the war was getting ready to be wrapped up, it seems like it's kind of ludicrous to ask for that much money, I would think. Also, there are other adventures planned, from what I understand, in the Americas. For instance, Cuba, Panama, Colombia. So we have an activist situation here, and it's going to be costly in terms of money, time, and manpower. In fact, you may have seen that the military is now accepting folks as old as 42 years of age. And I don't know how you were at age 42, but that's kind of strange in my estimation. What do you think?
Well, the problem is that if you look at the history of any country, if you spend too much of your annual budget on military wars, the country is bound to go bankrupt. In other words, there's no good could come out of the fact that you're spending $1 to $2 billion a day fighting unjustified war, because ultimately you run out of money and you can't engage in numerous conflicts. And somehow the military budget was almost $1 trillion to start with. And now you add on this $1 to $2 billion extra a day. But there's something else that's important about war, folks, that I want you to consider. And what most people don't realize, that they're saying that we have 13 to 14 brave Americans have been killed. What they're not talking about is the number of Americans that are injured. Now, why is that an important factor? Well, when you have soldiers in battle that are injured, it takes somewhere between 3 to 12 people to take care of that one injured soldier, whether it's hospital, rehabilitation. And so the amount of money that you're spending on assisting the medical needs is pretty significant. So this will cause our costs to escalate, plus the fact that now they become disabled veterans and they then have to receive a government disability check for the rest of their lives. So the cost of war is not just the human tragedy of people dying. The cost of war also include the people that suffer debilitating injuries and damages for the rest of their lives. So I want to keep that in mind, because I look at the number of people that are being injured, not just the people that are dying. And it's just amazing that they don't talk about that a lot, but those people's lives are shattered. You have people that lose their arms or legs, and we have these bombs and things hit. Sometimes you lose body parts, and the net result is that it's a cost on our national budget. It's a significant human tragedy, and these folks all have families, wives, kids. And so the point I'm making is that don't take this war lightly. Don't focus just on the death. The people that live is also a significant financial burden that we must all cover as taxpayers.
Well said. That was the main point I wanted to make, is that it seems like in any situation concerning the government particularly, you got to watch the money trail. And the media mentions these things, but they don't seem to focus on it. And that should be the main focus, I would think, or one of the main focuses anyway. So I hope there will be more attention paid to the pay, I guess.
Well, thanks, man, Guy. Okay, there's a lot of other subjects that we're going to try to get to. Counselor, there was a bomb hit this week out in California. The two verdicts against Meta and Google. Did any of you guys follow those cases?
Yeah, I followed those cases, and it looks like there was a adverse judgment against these social media companies. And a lot of them have had research for years about the addictive impact of the products that they're putting in American homes. So, it looks as though there'll be other copycat lawsuits around the country. And it will be interesting to see if there'll be similar results in other parts of the country.
Yes, both Meta and YouTube this week, juries returned verdicts in what may be landmark youth addiction cases. In less than 24 hours, um, the jury returned two high-profile verdicts in cases asserting that uh, these tech companies were liable of designing their platforms to be addictive for children and teens, despite the fact that they knew that teens would be addicted and possibly depressed. In the Meta YouTube case, the jury held that they intentionally allowed a young woman to become addicted to social media and causing her depression. Now, this is a potentially landmark decision because although the jury awarded $6 million in damages in one case, and then there's another case in New Mexico, the $6 million in damages was awarded in the California case that we're speaking about. But there are other cases, there are up to 350 cases that will be eventually filed. And I read that the insurance companies representing Meta and YouTube have um, been granted um, a decision, favorable decision, that they do not have to provide coverage in these cases. So $6 million um, can, I mean, as a baseline potentially for multi-millions or even billions of dollars that these companies may ultimately be found responsible for. In the New Mexico case, the jury ordered Meta to pay $375 million after finding that Meta had concealed knowing about child sexual exploitation on its platforms. So these are potentially precedent-setting cases.
Well, so these type cases are relevant in every community in America because trial lawyers have successfully identified why we had such an uptick in things like suicide and this aberrant behavior. And we find out that these large corporations are designing product that become so addicted until it causes severe mental depression in these young folks. Now, at the same time, what people were saying, Counselor, Meta last quarter profit was $60 billion. So they were saying that this may be a drop in the bucket today, but they're looking at potentially thousands of these lawsuits because it's going to affect folks in every community, every place across the country. And what generally happens is that you get these mass torts, litigation groups, and so the litigation be ongoing for the next decade. And so ultimately, what will happen is that there'll be some global settlement, but it won't be this year or next year. The typical pattern of the country that you see these type of litigation, like we've been watching Johnson & Johnson involved in the pesticide lawsuit, and it just grew thousands and thousands. It just kept increasing, and we're likely to see the same type of litigation in Meta. So eventually, I suspect within the next 30 days, you're going to see advertisement from law firms talking about whether or not your children has gotten depression and things like that. So it's going to grow. Make no mistake about it, because they have a valid concern. And we see such an uptick in violence and depression, and now we know why.
I agree, Attorney Lee. I believe that these cases will grow exponentially, analogous to the tobacco cases and others
Oh,
that you've referenced.
yes.
Yeah, I agree as well. And I think that, as parents, we also need to really spread the word that we have to protect our children against this, making sure that we're limiting the time on social media. And the other problem is that, a child may have a great experience and they can't enjoy it because they're always comparing themselves to somebody else on an algorithm by one of these social media companies. So it's really important that these, companies are held accountable. But especially African Americans, we need to also do more to help protect our children and getting appropriate information out to them as well.
Um, Now, we're about out of time, and so we have one more. On a sad note, Attorney Banks, I know you followed this case very carefully. Breonna Taylor, young lady that was murdered down in Louisville, Kentucky, uh, and doesn't look like that the family going to get ultimate justice in that case. What has happened?
Unfortunately, no justice for Breonna Taylor. And again, predictably, this Department of Justice under the current administration, they moved to dismiss the case against two former police officers that had falsified information and evidence that they provided to secure a warrant. And then they subsequently covered up that wrongdoing. And we know that they were accused of providing false information to secure a search warrant that led to the killing of Breonna Taylor as she was sleeping in her apartment in in Louisville, Kentucky, in 2020. The Biden administration had filed a civil rights action against these police officers for violating Breonna Taylor's civil rights when they knocked down her door in a raid on her home in 2020.
It's terrible. You know, Counsel, Indianapolis, I was thinking about that. That case garnered nationwide publicity, and rightfully so. But we had probably, Indianapolis had the worst crime statistic in America, in my opinion. In 2023, in Indianapolis, we had 18 Black males shot and killed by police officers here in the city. And, we've been in discovery on these cases. And what more disturbing is the city actually actively cover up their crimes. The city of Indianapolis and the current administration actually concealed their crime. For example, when the officer engaged in the shooting, they'll allow their FOP representative to give them answers to interrogation questions. So they actually protect the officer to the point that they know they're wrong and they still protect them. So these type of misconduct shouldn't go unpunished. And it's a sad day, I think, when you see a case like that even in overwhelming evidence, there's no justice, no accountability, and it's a trend. And so, but the only way we can get out of this cycle is that we really got to take our voting a little bit more serious in each elections, because we have ongoing election coming up. And this year we have the midterms. And we have to fight like hell to make sure that we win the Senate and House seats back to get some accountability. Because right now, we are targets you're more likely than not to be shot if an encounter police or you're a black male versus anybody else. So just keep that in mind. Any closing comment, counselors?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Elections matter, and the great work that you do in terms of, helping the administration with judicial selections. All this is just extremely important. And so it's just really emphasizes the importance of just voting and being aware.
Absolutely. I'm gratified to see the No Kings protest across this nation. I understand that they are being held in all 50 states and maybe the largest gathering of citizens um, historically. It anticipated that there will be between 10 to 11 million citizens exercising their fundamental right to protest peacefully across this nation.
Okay, and I hope that everybody enjoyed their Easter weekend. Next weekend, we will not be broadcasting. And so take care, everyone. May God bless and keep you all.
Okay, happy Easter. Take care.
Have a wonderful weekend.